you are listening to Season 6 of the award-winning Christian Outdoors podcast with your host, Pete Rogers. Welcome to Christian Outdoors podcast. Again, I'm Pete Rogers, your host. On today's Christian Outdoors podcast, we have with us a 28-year Navy veteran who, after a motorcycle accident that cost him the lower portion of his right leg, he found therapy through archery and the beginning of Limb-itless Outdoors. That's Limb-itless Outdoors, an outdoor community focused on amputees who love the outdoor lifestyle, was born. Aaron Ritter is a self-described former devout atheist. As he says, I walked away from Jesus the day I went to boot camp. His story of a life in the U.S. Navy, living the life he thought he always wanted, then the motorcycle accident that almost cost him his life, and years later, a transformation into becoming a follower of Jesus. This is one of those episodes that hits all the marks. I'm sure you will enjoy this show, so stay tuned, and we will get to the interview with Aaron Ritter, the founder of Limb-itless Outdoors. Aaron, thank you for joining me here on Christian Outdoors. Why don't you start by telling the listeners about yourself?
Well, first, I want to thank you for hosting me. This is just such a wonderful opportunity, especially for the primary focus of what our discussion will be on, and that is Jesus.
Right.
Have it right on my shirt. So I'm really excited about that. Who am I? Well, or where I come from. And you and I discussed that the opening line that you wanted me to share today was I walked away from Jesus Christ in 1991 when I went to Navy boot camp, San Diego, California.
Mm.
I was born and raised in a Christian home. I attended a Christian school for 2 years. I was very active in a youth group when I was in high school. But when I left the small town of Washougal, Washington to fly to San Diego, California for boot camp, I truly walked away from Jesus Christ. I
Mm.
did go to church through boot camp. However, there's a very specific reason for that. If you attended church on Sunday mornings, you were removed from any other training related activity. You were separated from your company commanders, and they allowed you to sleep. So we could go in the back room or the back portion of the sanctuary, lay down on the floor, and sleep through the entire service. When the service ended, they would wake you. You would fall back into ranks with your company, and then you would transit by foot back to your barracks. So I attended church every Sunday for 8 weeks just so that I could sleep for about an hour and a half.
Yeah. Yeah.
From that point, go ahead. Go ahead.
I have preached in front of congregations that sleep during the whole service, so I get it.
I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have. Oh, and maybe not even actually physically asleep. People
Oh,
will walk into the sanctuary and they're asleep on their phone because even though they're sitting in the sanctuary for service, they're still looking at their phone for
yeah.
the entire sermon. I
Well,
watch it every Sunday.
oh yeah, me too. But back in the day, we didn't have the phones, and they would. I would marvel at the older men who could sleep with their head upright and it wouldn't bob over. They would just close their eyes. They could balance their head and go right out. Just go right out. So, well, there they go again. There goes Fred.
That takes
There goes
talent.
Phil. It does. It does. So I understand what you're saying. But you walked away from Jesus then.
I did. I spent the first 4 years. I had a break in service from active duty. My first 4 years, I shipped over to Italy. And in Italy, I worked at a NATO command, met a lot of great people, did not attend any type of service, did not believe. I truly started walking towards atheism at that point in my life.
Mm.
Started looking through the view of there's so many different religions throughout the world and throughout history that they were all man-made and that they were all based on man's curiosity of where we came from and how the earth was created, what we're doing here, why we're alive, and how we live our lives, and then justifying our mental need for connection and where we go in an afterlife.
Mhm.
And for me, in my mindset, I started viewing all of those as weakness.
Mm.
I figured where I came from doesn't really matter. I was born through my mother and father. and how I live while I'm on the earth is going to point me in a couple of different directions. One can be in jail, and I thank God every day for my mother and father and how they raised me. If they had not been Christian people and been so active in my life as a child, I would have been in jail and a felon rather than a veteran and doing great things now in my life. So I'm
Mhm.
very thankful for that. But how you live your life while you're alive will determine who you are, what you're known for, what you experience, whether it's a jail cell or a great career or a family or whatever it is you choose to accomplish.
Mhm.
And then when you die, I was not deeply connected to death. For me, when people die in my circle, I hurt more from those around me that are hurting than it is from the actual loss.
Mhm.
And so I started viewing the afterlife as when I die, I'm just going to go in the ground and turn into carbon and worm dirt. And
Yeah.
I didn't believe in anything. And again, I really looked at the history of man and how many different religions and gods and deities and goddesses that are in storybooks and in history and written on walls of caves or rock cliffs or scrolls or you name it. I mean, look at where Mormonism and Jehovah Witnesses, they came to light in the 1800s.
Yeah.
So even within the lifetime of our nation, which is one of the youngest nations in the world, if not the youngest nation in the world, we still had religions being created by mankind here. And so
Right.
that's how I viewed it. And the more I looked at my life and the world through that mindset, the further I drifted away from any belief in any religion, in any type of deity that controlled or created us, or vice versa, created and controlled us.
Mhm.
And that's how I lived my life. I came home from the first 4 years. I met up with a service buddy of mine that I met in Naples, Italy, and he certainly was not a godly man at that time. I do believe Ronnie may have believed in a God, but he certainly did not live the life of a Christian man. And we both met up together, and I have what's called a dog tag here on my left rib cage. It's my dog tag. It has all my information on it. Where it asks for religious preference, it says no preference. So I literally had it tattooed on my body that I had no preference when it comes to religion. I lived a wild and crazy life. I drank a lot. I was a womanizer. I slept around a lot. That was one of my pursuits was chasing women. Chased adrenaline feverishly through my entire life. I rode bulls in college and in a couple of 3 different semi-professional circuits. I became a firefighter. That's why I left the service. I wanted to become a fireman. And then I entered the Navy Reserve community and was attached to an explosive ordnance disposal command. And from there, I started transitioning into the world of special operations, and that led me back to active duty. Uh, During that transition of my life, I went through multiple failed marriages. I was choosing the wrong women for the wrong reasons.
Mhm.
One of those women practiced witchcraft. She was a pagan. She sold sex toys for a living. And this is testament to my mother and father. They welcomed her into their home.
Mm.
They had no fear of that woman. They prayed for us every day. They prayed for me for 3 decades. But during that time, and that was a 5 year-ish relationship with her. And they prayed for us every day. And again, they welcomed her into their home and our family and did not hold anything against her, did not judge her. They prayed for her. And thankfully, that period of my life ended. Now I entered more and future failed relationships at that point. Went back on active duty, went through the EOD pipeline down in Florida, entered the EOD service, and had some incredible experiences there. Deployed to Iraq 2 times. Really enjoyed my time over in Iraq and the men that I served with and the
Were you still in
experiences
the
that I had.
Were you still in the Navy?
I was.
Okay, so you
I
didn't change
was.
branches. You just went back to active duty, but still with the
That
Navy.
is that
Okay.
is correct. I served all my time in, Navy, be it active duty or reserve.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
my first period of service was 1991 to 94 for active duty. Um, and then, well, February 95.
Okay.
February 95, I exited service, went transitioned into the reserves, and I was in the reserves from 1996. I took a year off, entered the reserves in 1996, and in 2005 is when I returned to active duty. I was a firefighter at Walla Walla Fire Department, the
Okay.
city of Walla Walla in Washington State, and I was a reservist at EOD Mobile Unit 17 on Whidbey Island, Washington, and they put me in charge of a 5-man dive team to go over to Bahrain and conduct anti-swimmer operations in Bahrain. And oddly enough, this was the time where I was involved with that one particular woman in my life. And my father asked me as I was preparing to ship down to San Diego again for our training with what the Navy called the mammal systems at that time, prior to going to Bahrain. My dad asked me, he said, "Son, are you going to be a sailor or a fireman? Because you're doing a crap job at either one." And what he was referencing
Thanks, Dad.
was, yeah, well, my dad is very insightful, and I have a very he's one of my best friends, and I seek his knowledge and advice frequently. And he stated that to me because he was watching me. I was being surpassed in the fire department by what the military would call my peer group being the men that I was hired with and went through the probationary period with. I was
Mhm.
being surpassed by them because I was spending so much time on active duty orders with the Navy and so much time on Whidbey Island training and working with them. Yet I was not progressing in a military career per se because I was still in the reserves. But
Right.
I was living a grand life for a man that was focused on himself and his own pride and what he was seen as, because I was a full-time firefighter working at most 9 days a month, not counting overtime, regular hours, 9 days a month. And then I was over with the Navy filling a really cool, unique role as a diver qualified to handle explosives for pinned EOD techs in the Navy. And that what one of the things that I find unique is I was sitting in the locker room at EOD Mobile Unit 17 one day on active duty orders, and one of the active duty individuals at that command, we had just finished a dive together, and we were in the locker room cleaning up, and he reached in his locker and he pulled out what's known as a basic badge. So in EOD, so all 4 services have EOD, and they all go to the same school. It's a Navy ran school on an Air Force base in Florida. But you have a basic badge, a senior badge, and a master badge. So when you graduate EOD school, you put on a basic badge. And then each service has its own pipeline on how you obtain your senior and master qualifications. So he
Explain
hands me
EOD.
an
Explain EOD to the non-explosive ordnance
ordnance disposal. Those are the
disposal.
guys that we defuse bombs, we take apart IEDs,
Got it.
suicide vests.
Got
The
it.
Marine Corps is really known for um, inerting ordnance, making training aids or taking things apart, learning how they work.
Got it.
That's
Got it.
what explosive ordnance disposal is. We do a whole lot of other things, but that's us in a nutshell.
Got it. Okay.
So this gentleman hands me a basic EOD badge and he says, "You're going to need this." And I looked at him and started laughing. So what do I need this for? He said, "You're going to go to EOD school one day. You will be a Navy EOD tech." My response was, "You're nuts. I'm living the life of I literally said I'm living the life of a rock star. I'm a professional firefighter. I work 9 days a month, and I'm attached to a Navy EOD reserve command, and I'm a diver, and I'm qualified to handle explosives, and I get to work with you guys. Why would I want to go back on active duty and work a whole lot more hours for less pay?
Yeah.
Well, fast forward about a year, and I was at EOD school going through the pipeline.
He knew it. He knew it.
He
Yeah.
he did. So did he. When we talk about he, so I went on my first deployment. I came home from said deployment and another divorce, and I was out on my motorcycle with a group of guys. There was 5 of us, and I had a mechanical failure on my bike, and I took the bike off road. I came off the bike, and my right leg hit a tree, and it ripped my right leg off completely.
What were you riding?
Completely severed it. I was my entire body was about 100 meters from my lower right leg. It was in the
Wow.
street, and I was out in the field.
All right, I got to ask some questions. As a motorcycle rider, I got to ask some questions. All right, first, what were you riding?
I
Not
was
your bike.
riding a Harley Davidson Road King.
Oh, there you go. Harley Davidson. Just kidding, Harley Davidson people. All right, just kidding. But I told you what I ride pre-show. I'm not going to say it out loud, BMW. But there's a joke to the Harley Davidson people. So Road King, and how fast were you going?
Well, we don't know exactly. My throttle locked wide open, but we do believe that it
You
was
had a
in
mechanical
excess of 90 miles per hour.
so you had a mechanical failure. It wasn't a deer ran out in front of you or a car, which is one of the most things for other people who don't ride motorcycles. Motorcyclists know that cars don't see us a lot, and that's what causes the majority of the
Yes.
wrecks is cars not seeing us and pulling out in front of us or turning in front of us because they just don't see us. Again, that's why we ride with our headlights on. And sidebar, I recommend to anybody who's riding to add lights to your motorcycle, LEDs particularly because they're very bright and it just helps us to be seen. Now, I'm also not one who rides in a highlighter suit either, though. I think those are kind of silly. But and you know what I'm talking about, the bright yellow
I
suits, bright
do.
yellow, they look like a highlighter going down the road. But if that makes you comfortable so that you can be seen, by all means. But it's you just got to be hyper defensive, but you can't control mechanical failures.
Mhm.
Things happen. So you hit a tree at a high rate of speed,
Yes.
and your right leg got um, what's the word you used?
Ripped off.
Oh, oh,
It was literally ripped off my body.
at where? At the knee,
Below the knee.
below the knee. So both bones broke and it ripped it off. Wow,
Yes.
I can't even imagine, Aaron. Cannot imagine that. And how old were you when that happened?
I was 39 years old,
Okay, okay, wow.
awake and conscious the entire time.
So you saw it and you were awake and conscious. I'm assuming, like I've heard from a lot of people who've had very tragic things like that, is there was no pain in initially.
There
Your body
was no
just goes
pain.
into shock. Your body just goes into shock and shuts that down. Um, and you were awake, so you could stop the bleeding, get help pretty quick. There were people with you. It's not like an isolated road, correct?
Correct. So I did not know my leg was ripped off immediately. I came to a stop in the field and just started doing a mental assessment, and nothing hurt, and I knew I was awake and coherent. I was looking up at a star-filled sky and just started moving hands, moving my head around, and I pushed up on my elbows and I looked down the length of my body, and I wore Chuck Taylors, the tennis shoes, a lot at that point in my life,
Very
and
safe, right? Yeah, very safe.
I looked down the length of my lower body, and I could see the white toe of my left foot sticking up. I looked down my right leg, and the pant leg was flat. I could not see that white Chuck Taylor sticking up into the air, and at that point, I knew that my leg was gone, and I laid my head back down, and I'm looking at the sky, and I literally thought to myself, "Well, that sucks." And one of the guys that I was riding with, his name is Chris. I saw him running towards me from my left side, and he was pulling his belt off of his body as he was approaching me. And he slid up next to me and started putting the belt on as a tourniquet. That's all we had. And I grabbed him by his right shoulder and got his attention, and I asked him, I said, "Is it really gone, Chris?" And he looked at me and he said, "Yeah, yeah, it's gone."
Yeah.
And that was a big turning point in my life. And initially, for a very brief moment, I just wanted to die.
Yeah.
Because again, what I referenced earlier, I was full of pride and my own self-worth. I did not believe in any type of a deity. In fact, this is a really interesting point. This last December, I was home with my family, and I was at church with my mother and father. I was home for over a week. The first 5 days I was home, my father and I attended and or was involved in some type of men's group, Bible study, or church service for 5 days straight. It was absolutely amazing. And I was at the church service early. My mother and father both served their church. And I was interacting with some of the men that my father is really close to. And we were sitting in the sanctuary talking, and they asked me about my story. And as I shared some of the same words that I'm sharing with you right now, it it hit me that when I was laying in the grass bleeding out, I did not think of any God, not praying to our God, asking him to save my life, asking for forgiveness, promising that I would do anything that he led me to do if he saved my life. There was nothingness for me,
Wow.
absolute nothingness for me. And I had never quitted anything in my life at that point in time.
Mhm.
I wanted to join the Navy, I joined the Navy. I wanted to get out of the Navy and become a firefighter, so I got out of the Navy and became a firefighter. I wanted to ride bulls, so I started riding bulls, and I made it onto the college rodeo team, and I rode the circuit for 3 different, rodeo circuits.
Mhm.
I wanted to get into Navy special operations, so I got into Navy special operations and I made it through EOD school. Anything and everything that I wanted to accomplish in my life at that point in time, I had done so. I was very into physical fitness and trying to look as good as that I could look and try to perform as good as I could perform and be the best EOD tech that I could be and just live my life with my hair on fire. Nothing about me had any type of a elemental leadership person, individual idea inside my head. I truly thought that I was born, I was living one time, and I was going to die, and that was it. So when I was laying there with my leg ripped off, everything that I had ever accomplished and what I was doing for the Navy and what I wanted to accomplish in the Navy just went out the window. I
Yeah.
knew nothing else. And I
Yeah.
grabbed Chris by the shoulder and I told him to let me go because I did not see anything else.
Right.
And Chris looked at me and his words were, "No way. If there's anybody that can overcome this, it's you." Now, fast forward to another interesting conversation. This took place just a few weeks ago. I was on the phone with my mother and father, and we have many Ritter revivals. A good friend of mine has started referencing them as Ritter revivals. My mom and dad and I now talk and discuss our faith almost daily,
Mhm.
weekly for sure. And I was on the phone on a conference call with my parents, and I referenced the loss of my leg as an act of God. He he allowed that to happen to me for a purpose. And initially, my father disagreed with me. And my father is a very, very knowledgeable, educated, Christian, faithful man, and I lean on him a lot. But we truly had a disagreement that morning. But he said to me, he said, "Son, God does not truly allow bad things to happen to people." He said, "Son, the loss of your leg was a bad thing." And my response was, "Dad, I disagree with you. The loss of my leg was a good thing because it made me a man that I never thought that I could be. I've done more on a metal leg than I ever had in the first 39 years of my life.
Mhm.
And God has used this as a tool to lead me in that direction, to bring me back to him so that I could work at a greater level on his behalf. I truly believe that that was
Yeah.
in his plan for me. And when
Yeah.
I communicated that to my father in that manner, my dad said, "Well, I never looked at it that way." It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, from the outside, Aaron, if I may, I see you two saying the same thing, just saying it differently. I see
You
you
could,
two saying
I
the
think
same
you could
thing,
probably say that
but
too.
seeing it.
Yes.
As a dad, what I think your dad's saying is God didn't cause this, but God is using this tragedy
Mm,
for His glory. See, that's
that's
two
a great
different.
way to look at it as well.
God didn't cause this. I need Aaron to lose his leg so he can find me. No, that's not how it works. Is this mechanical failure on your Harley Davidson? And I'm not dissing Harley Davidson, but this mechanical failure in your Harley Davidson caused a very tragic event. How can we turn this for good? Is go back to the story of Joseph being sold into slavery. What he
Mm,
said to his brothers, you meant this for harm, but God meant it for good. And so I see you and your dad saying the same thing. You're just saying it differently.
great point.
Okay.
Love it.
All right. So
So,
how did all this lead you back to Jesus?
well, not for several years. When I retired from the Navy in 2021,
So you had a medical retirement, I guess.
I did not. No, I pursued a full recovery. I returned to full duty status, and I returned to a team.
Oh, wow.
I was promoted to chief. In fact, the same year that I lost my leg, I was selected for chief in the Navy. I went through the entire process to become a chief. Went back to the command that I was actually assigned to, a training command at the time of my limb loss, and spent 2 years teaching other EOD techs, recovering, and received my I call it my Pinocchio letter, telling me that I was a real boy according to the Navy, and they sent me over to Spain, where I was placed on a team as the leading chief petty officer of a four-man special operations special forces EOD team in support of some pretty cool guys in Army Special Forces. And I did that before I transitioned into my last command to retire. So in 2017, I I took orders to a command in Southern Maryland, and I had stopped hunting for the most part from the time I went in the Navy until I retired, for the most part. Early in my Navy career, I still hunted, and that's when I started backcountry hunting, was in
Okay.
1996. But I once I went into the special operations pipeline, I stopped hunting and I truly just focused on being the best special operator that I could.
Mhm.
Using the term special operator, coming from special operations, being the best EOD tech that I could. When I arrived in Southern Maryland in 2017, I decided that I wanted to get back into full-fledged hunting in my life. I stopped riding motorcycles at that point. I owned one. I stopped riding it, and I truly just immersed myself back into hunting. That's when I discovered whitetail hunting. I discovered tree stand hunting, climber hunting, tree saddle hunting, and I started backcountry hunting again.
Okay.
And then I retired, and when I retired, that was my passion became hunting, and that's when God truly started working in my life.
Okay.
I closed the door on that military chapter, and God started placing man after man after man into my life that was focused on archery and God.
Mm.
Numerous men. I now call them the arrows in my quiver. They are my quiver of men. And it was nonstop. And I kept when I say I was pushing them away, I became very close with them. They're all great friends of mine. Some of them I hunt with. Some of them I fellowship with on a weekly basis. But I pushed their faith away.
Mhm.
I was very open about being an atheist. And given the opportunity, I would sit down with any of them and try to draw them over to the dark side. I would try to enlighten them on the 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 fa- um, the fallacy in what they believed, and they all stood firm. Couple of them pressured me a little bit. Most of them just lived a life of witness for me. And this went on for several years. God placed an incredible woman in my life who I am now married to. But the unique part about that connection that God created was she was not a woman of faith. She was not raised in faith. She really knew nothing about Christianity, but she did believe in God, but she did not know why.
Right. Right.
So, December of 2023, her stepfather passed. And we were in Western Maryland. I was planning a backcountry muzzleloader hunt, or I had planned a backcountry muzzleloader hunt. Her father-in-law, or my father-in-law, was they had hospice care. He was in a hospital bed in their home, and I had asked my wife Tara, or I told her, I think I'm going to cancel my hunt. I'm just going to stay with you and your mother. And she said, no, you need to go hunt. I want you to go hunt, and I can have some time with my mother.
Where
So
was
we
it?
arrived at my mother-in-law's house, and Ron was in the living room. Are you still with me?
Yeah. Where was your hunt? Where were you going hunting?
What Western Maryland?
Okay. Backcountry
So
in
it
Maryland.
was
Wow.
So when I say backcountry, for me, backcountry is a mindset. Whether you're packing in point 0.8 miles or 8 miles, if you're using terrain features in a wilderness area to get away from the common hunter, and you're sleeping in a shelter on the ground, eating freeze-dried food for a period of days, you're backcountry hunting. I don't care where you're at.
I like that. I like that. We need to come
It
back to
is
that.
truly a mindset.
Yeah, we
So
need to come
that's
back to that on another show. But anyway, yeah, I like that. Okay.
would love to. Would love to. So I went in, all the family was there. That was and I asked my wife multiple times, "Do you truly want me to go?" And she said, "Yes, you need to. And Ron would want you to do this." Ron was a deer hunter.
Mhm.
So Ron had been unresponsive for the most part. And I walked up to his bedside as I had changed my clothes. I was getting ready to drive to the trailhead. And I grabbed him by the hands, and I leaned down and I kissed him on the forehead, and I whispered in his ear. I'm going to try not to get emotional about this, but I whispered to him, "Ron, I'm going to go shoot you one last deer." And he squeezed my hand,
Mm.
and I kissed him again, and I walked out the door. And I arrived at the trailhead about 10 o'clock at night, packed in under darkness, and it was cold. It was my first run with a hot tent, so I had a packable titanium stove with me, and I packed in, set up my camp, and went to sleep with the stove running. Woke up in the morning, everything was frozen. We were in single digits. It was cold, really cold. And I got up in the morning and had my breakfast and put a primer in my rifle and took off into the woods. And it was that morning I was up on the side hill of a drainage, and I pulled out my Garmin, and Tara had texted me to let me know that Ron had passed. And I had an incredible day. I told her that I was packing out. She told me, "No, I want you to stay. There's nothing that you can do at this point." And she said, "Please just finish out your hunt." And I hunted for about 2 more hours. I was trying to do what my wife had asked me to do and not come home. It just didn't sit well with me. More so because of my father than anything else. My father is a champion for my mother, and I'm a champion for my wife. And I thought, how will my father view me if I just continue this hunt? Why my Even though my wife is telling me to continue the hunt, what would my father do? And I sat down and I had my lunch, and I packed off the mountain, or I hunted down off the mountain back to camp. I broke my camp down, and I didn't tell my wife that I was coming back until I was already back at the truck and driving home. I told her, I said, "I'm on my way home." So we went through that process, and we were sitting at the memorial service. I was in the front row. There was 5 of us on our side. My mother-in-law was to my left, my wife was to my right, and then her sister and her nephew. and I had my arms around my mother-in-law and my wife, and I could touch my sister-in-law with my right fingertips. And the the minister that was performing this memorial service was the minister that the family had used for Tara's entire life. She would go to church at Christmas, but a lot of her family did go to church, and they went to the same church, and it was the same minister. And this gentleman was speaking to us about Ron, and Ron was a hard man. Ron was a loving man, but he was a hard man, a heavy drinker, and but he believed there was a God, and he spent time he would drive to the church often and have one-on-one discussions with the pastor, the minister, because his fear was not going to heaven.
Right.
And and Ron had talked to me about his fear, and I never ever shared my atheism with Ron. At that stage in his life, I really felt that there was no benefit in that. And the minister shared that Ron came and chatted with him about his fears, and they prayed, and Ron accepted God into his heart and would ask for forgiveness for his sins. And he's standing in front of us sharing this, and I had this roaring sound inside my head. That's the easiest way for me to describe it. It's like putting two seashells up to my ears and hearing the ocean. That was the roaring sound that I could hear inside my head. And my thoughts were, if there's any chance that I can spend an eternity with the people that I love by giving my life back to God, why would I not do that? What is it that I believe in that is better than that? At that, and this is all happening in a very minute amount of time.
Yeah, in
I'm
seconds. No,
listening.
yeah,
Yes. Yes. I had been raised in Christianity. I had accepted God into my heart as a very young man. I had been baptized as a very young man. I had gone to a Christian school. I owned a Bible. I hadn't looked at it for decades. It was buried away in boxes. I had had a Christian foundation. I knew what Christianity was. I had just walked away from it and did 180 degrees from it. But I was sitting there in that room, and I had my arms around two women that were so important to me in my life, and I was trying to absorb their grief, and I'm just thinking to myself, do I really want to leave the earth just turning into dirt? If there's any chance that that Jesus Christ and God is real, and that eternity in heaven is real, and that I can spend eternity with the Trinity and with my loved ones, why would I not make that choice? Like I said, I was raised in a Christian home. I'd gone to a Christian school. I I had salvation when I was a child. I was baptized when I was a child. I had a foundation. I did 180 degrees. I left it all. For what? To to go into nothingness? And I had that roaring inside my head, but I walked away from it. But that night, I text a good friend of mine. His name is Al Quackenbush, and Al Quackenbush happens to be the best friend of Chris Ham, who I believe is the man that encouraged you to have me on the show.
he is. And as a reference to the listeners, we had Al on the show a couple of weeks ago. We got his story. Chris, a few months ago, Chris has been introducing me to some of these people, one of which is Aaron. And so, yes, I know. I think Al's show actually air next week as we're recording this, and you'll be just a few
Okay.
weeks after that. So, yeah, so it's cool that I know these people that you're talking about. So he introduced you to Al. Al introduced you to Chris.
I Jesus introduced me to Al.
Oh,
That's a whole nother story.
we'll come back to that one another day.
Al introduced me to Chris Ham, who Chris Ham is now. I I Chris is just such a foundation for me in my faith.
Good, good dude.
And anyhow, I text Al, And I told him that I was dealing with a lot of confliction. Now, fast forward, it wasn't confliction, it was conviction. Two very different words leading to the same place. And he asked me, "Do you want to talk about it?" I was laying in bed. I was actually in my mother-in-law and father-in-law's bed with my wife because Ron couldn't sleep in that bed anymore. They transitioned to a spare bed, and then he transitioned into the hospice bed. Karen wasn't ready to move back into their bedroom, so when we stayed there, Tara and I were in their bed. So I'm laying in my father-in-law's bed. I'm texting Al about these conflicted feelings, and he asked me, "Do you want to talk about it?" And I said no, and he left it. I'm pretty sure Al knew what I was struggling with. So a couple of weeks later, I received information that a very good friend of mine in Walla Walla Fire Department had died. Ryan Pleasance was younger than me by almost 10 years. He had been on shift on Saturday. Sunday morning, he did not wake up for shift change, and the crew went into his bunk room and found him dead in his bunk. He had had massive heart complications, died in his sleep.
Mhm.
And that hit me really hard. Ryan was such an amazing man. And almost a week had gone by from that notification, and I was in my truck driving home from an archery shop. I was on the phone with Chris Ham, and we were talking about the bow for my nonprofit. And we hung up, and I was driving down the road. I was within miles of my home, and Eric Swanson calls me. And Eric Swanson was a lieutenant when I was at the fire department. He's now a captain, and he was Ryan's shift captain. And he was on shift with Ryan at the department because two stations in Walla Walla. He was at the station with Ryan and was there when they found Ryan. Eric called me on the phone because he wanted to ensure that I knew all the details. So I'm talking to Eric on the phone, and I pull into our driveway here where my wife and I live, and going through a roller coaster of emotions with Eric. I'm sobbing, I have snot running down my face. We're laughing, we're crying, we're sharing things about Ryan. And I just start feeling this weight. And I've rarely in my life cried as hard as I was crying that day. And Eric and I finally terminate our phone call, and I got out of my truck and I could hardly walk across the gravel in my driveway. It was like I was being pushed to the ground,
Mm.
literally being pushed to the ground. And I started craving my Bible.
Hmm.
And I walked into the house knowing that I needed my Bible. And I sat down at our kitchen islands, and I kind of felt a little bit of relief, and my wife texted me because I had texted her what was going on. She texted me, "I'm on my way home. How are you doing?" And I just crashed again. I just started sobbing again. And I told her, I was like, "I'm not doing well." And she pulled up in the driveway. Our chocolate lab started barking. He barks every time that he hears her car come home. And Sig and I went outside to greet her, and she put her arms around me, and I just started breaking down again. So she got me back into the house. And we're sitting at the islands, and I had skipped a little part. Tara and I had had a conversation about religion and faith 2 years prior. I'll skip that for right now. But I told her, I said, "Tara, I need my Bible." And I said, "I need to share something with you." And so I shared with her what I had felt at Ron's memorial. And she looked at me and she said, "I felt the same thing." Now, again, my wife had no background in Christianity. She just knew that there was a God. And I'm sobbing at literally snot running down my face. And I told her, "I need my Bible." So we both got up and went in different directions. And I refer to my wife as my cloud. I'm 52, I'm TBI. my memory's terrible, and my wife's a little bit younger than I am, and she is sharp as a tack. So she just remembers everything for me. So I call her my cloud. I went upstairs, started in the attic, and I'm ripping apart boxes that I had not been in for years. And old plastic boxes that have been in and out of the sun and in attics and moved. They're all taped up, and I'm pulling lids, and they're just shattering. And I'm just rummaging through all of my artifacts. And I feel this hand on my shoulder, and I turn around, and my wife is standing there with my Bible. Now, this is the Bible that my mother and father purchased for me when they enrolled me in Portland Christian school system. It was the Bible that was required for me to attend that school, and they had wrote in it, and I still have it. It's upstairs in my office on my desk, and I did not know what I was going to do with it. I just knew I needed it. So she put it in my hands, and I walked downstairs, and I sat down in a chair in our back sunroom, and I'm just sitting there, and my wife was going to go for a run. So she put on her running clothes as she came in. She said, "Babe, I'm going to go for a run. Do you need me? Do you need anything?" And I told her, I said, "No, I just need to be alone for a little bit." She said, "Okay, I'll be back." And she left, and I prayed. And it's the first time that I had prayed in almost 3 decades. And that's where the work began. So one thing that if I could share anything from this show, of all the things that we're going to talk about, that salvation is the easy part. Not that my return to salvation was easy, very, very traumatic, very emotional experience. It encompassed loss on many levels. But that was the easy part. It's the honeymoon of being a Christian. Sanctification is work. It's challenging. It's being comfortable being uncomfortable. But I thought that it could be easy. In my mind, I swore as a sailor, not like a sailor, because I had been a sailor for 28 years. So I swore as a sailor. I still enjoyed alcohol. I still told off-color jokes. I wasn't willing really to sacrifice every Sunday. I For a year I struggled sitting down and reading my Bible or devotionals every day for a year, and I communicated this for months. I'm now a Christian man. I've walked away from atheism. I was an idiot for 30 years. I have God in my heart. I love God. I'm a Christian man now, but I am not going to change. I stood on that rock for months claiming that I would not change. I'm still going to cuss. I'm still going to drink. I'll still watch porn if I want to. I'm going to be the guy that I was so that I can connect and witness to other men that are like that. And I struggled and stumbled for a year and started attending church, but randomly. My wife and I and Tara started attending church. We would stream church as often as we would actually go to church. We did not communicate or interact with anybody at our church. We would just show up, we would attend service, and then we would go shop and come home. Well, last December, and I skipped a part. I did start a men's group. How could I skip the quiver of men? So the day after I asked God to come back into my heart, I reached out to two men, Jeff Literal and Anthony Fiorilli. Jeff Literal was a lifelong man of faith. His father, he was a preacher's kid. His father was a minister. Anthony was not a man of faith, but he was exploring the idea of it. He was a prior Catholic, wanted nothing to do with Catholicism and or going to church. But I knew that he was seeking something. So
Right.
I
Right.
reached out to both of them and I asked them, "Would you be willing to meet with me one night a week? I can't do this alone. I know that I cannot do this alone. I want to connect with both of you one night a week. You name the weeknight, you name the time frame, let's do it." So they chose Tuesday nights, and we settled on a 40-minute time block because that's free for Zoom. We can do a free Zoom for 40 minutes.
Mhm.
So that was on a Thursday. By that first Tuesday, we had 5 men joining the Zoom call. One of them was out in Texas. All of them were men that God had placed in my life for a purpose for him. And we call our Tuesday nights the Quiver of Men.
Mm.
We now have 11 men in the quiver. We
That's
celebrated our 1-year anniversary this last January. Well, we became stagnant, and I started struggling with that. We were devotionally dependent, so we didn't truly study the Bible. Well, we studied the Bible, but only through devotionals. We utilize Steve Chapman, which he is amazing. Love his content, but I don't believe it was necessarily the right tool to use for a year straight. We weren't actually getting into the Bible
right.
and really started, and guys were being complacent, self included. And I started becoming a hypocrite because what I was preaching to the guys on Tuesday nights, I had stopped doing myself. And so I started praying about it, and I laid it at my Father's feet, not just Jesus, but my father of the flesh, my earthly father, and
Mhm.
started reaching out to men in his life and Chris Ham, seeking their advice on how do I redirect the quiver? How do I get myself and the other men in the quiver back in a direction pointed at God rather than just being lazy and complacent in a hunting based devotional that we end up telling war stories and hunting stories more often than we're actually talking about our faith.
Right.
And this last December, I truly gave everything to God. I asked him to take foul language from my tongue, and he did it. I I don't curse anymore. I asked him to wash porn out of my life, and he did it. I gave him the quiver, and he's actually induced trial and tribulation over the last few weeks that we have overcome and we have grown from, and we're stronger and better now than we ever were. And we're now deeply focused on studying the Bible through, well, right. We just transitioned into, have you heard of the book Dialed In?
No.
Oh, we're in chapter 1 right now. We just finished a study of the armor of God. Prior to that, we went through Galatians. We're in a completely new direction. I gave my entire nonprofit to God, and we are being blessed and challenged, but the blessings are just incredible.
Mhm.
And I am now a full-time student at Liberty University pursuing my bachelor's of science in Christian leadership and business management. I serve my church on the security team. I'm starting another men's group in the local area through it's called the Men's Alliance, and that's a national-based men's group. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they use physical fitness and Bible study combined together around a fire, an actual fire. That's what the Men's Alliance is based on, and
Well, if it
I'm
involves physical fitness, I'm out.
that's okay. But we're working on launching the first Men's Alliance tribe here on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and I live for God now. And my new direction, I've been known for a lot of things. I've been known as a sailor. I've been known as a rodeo guy. I've been known as a firefighter. I've been known as a Navy EOD tech and a special operations guy. I have my own podcast. I'm known as an amputee, a long distance runner. I run ultra marathons on a metal leg. That's how I met my wife. Actually, I've been known as a lot of things, and what I spent my life doing was being a different man depending upon the room or the arena that I was in.
Mhm. I
I
get that. Yeah.
and when I left my mother and father's home in December, I made a new commitment to God that I wanted to be the same man everywhere that I went. And I became very focused on that. And over the last few months, and through a 12-week Bible study that I just finished with my church, it's called the Freedom Group. What I realized was I don't need to just be the same man in every room or arena that I am in. I need to ensure that I have God by my side in every room and arena that I'm in, because without him by my side, I will fail at being that same man everywhere that I go. Because if I'm engaged with non-believers, or if I'm in a questionable atmosphere, if that's where my path leads me for whatever reason, and I believe that path is led by God, that I have to have him next to me, or I will falter and or fail. And so that's been my journey.
Wow. What a great story, Aaron. What a great, I mean, there's so much there we could unpack and talk for another 3 hours, I'm sure. But we are getting close to our time, and you've referenced your nonprofit several times. So as we bring this full circle, why don't you tell us about that, and then we can bring this to a close. Tell us about your nonprofit and what that's all about.
So my nonprofit, it's a national nonprofit focused on combining archery and amputees. I I leveraged archery and I still use archery for physical fitness and mental health. Archery is so therapeutic.
Hmm.
And I wanted to share that with other amputees. So, and again, this was a seed planted by Chris Ham 4 years ago when we were preparing for my first podcast with him. And on a Sunday morning after my first phone call with Chris Ham, I sat on the couch drinking coffee with my wife, and I looked at her and I said, "Tara, I want to do something more tangible for amputees through archery. Um, Having a limitless platform, a website, a Facebook page, social media, YouTube, whatever, that's not enough anymore. I don't feel like I'm really doing anything. I'm not making an impact. I want to tangibly do something for amputees through archery. I want to start a grant. I want to put archery equipment in the hands of amputees and introduce them into the sport and eventually take them hunting."
Hmm.
And she said, "Okay, let's do it." Her one question was, "What happens if you're not able to get all of the equipment donated this year? Are you willing to spend our own money on that equipment?" I said, "If you're okay with it, I'm 100% okay with it." And she said, "I'm in. Let's do this." So that's where we started. It's the annual Amputee Archery Grant Initiative. For short, it's called the A3G Initiative. We are now in our fourth year. So the first year it was all equipment. It was archery equipment and outdoor equipment, and I had it all shipped to the house. And I drove it to Wisconsin to one of Chris Ham's archery events, and we provided it to a single upper limb amputee, Andrew Masick. That December, uh, a guy called me. His name's Chris Dunlap. He's in my quiver of men. We connected through Badlands Camo. I'm a big Badlands guy. You can, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see it on my cup. I love Badlands. Um, he and I were in a Facebook group together. Did not know each other, but he was seeing the things that I was doing with the grant. So he called me on the phone on New Year's Eve, out of the blue, didn't recognize the number, called me. I ignored it. Text me, "Hey, my name's Chris Dunlap. I know you through Badlands. I'm trying to call you." I read the text. My phone rings again. So I answer it. He's like, "Hey, have you ever been to Texas? We want to host you on a hunt." So I went. And a week after I returned from that hunt, he said, "Hey, I spoke with the ranch owner. We want to host your recipient from now on for your grant hunt.
Oh,
We
wow.
want to make this come true." So that next grant cycle, we hosted Chris Norton, our second recipient in Texas, had an amazing time. He harvested his first ever antlered whitetail deer, his first antlered deer ever with any
Nice.
weapon. He did it
Nice.
with his Grant bow. It was a Pope and Young class whitetail.
Very nice.
The next year, Eric Griggs from Gas Bowstrings grabbed me at the ATA. He said, and they had been with us since year one. He said, Aaron, I have an idea. I want to table and offer an event at the Gas facility for your recipients every year. How about you bring them to Gas? We'll do a tour. We'll build their bow on site, and we will have our podium level shooters provide them one-on-one coaching while they're there. So last year we kicked that event off, and we took Dustin Pruitt, who was our third recipient, to Gas. Dustin was a bilateral lower limb amputee, and he had a hand deformity that he had webbing and only has 4 fingers, has a lot of reduced strength in his hands. We brought him to Gas, and his very first shot with a compound bow was standing on his own 2 legs, shooting his bow that he helped build at Gas. There was not a dry eye in the facility. It was just incredible.
That's amazing.
And that became more important to myself and to the board members of the A3G and to Eric than our hunt. Braden Gillentine, I'm not sure if you're familiar with who Braden is. Braden, I have photos with him, and I had the opportunity to stand back and watch Braden interact with Dustin one-on-one for a day and a half. Talk about a humble man. As gifted as he is so humble. And to watch those two standing with each other, sitting with each other, shooting with each other, just engaging in conversation. And Braden mentioned something at dinner the second night we were there that we've all clung to. And we were talking about the difference between the Gas event and the Texas hunt. He said, going to Texas, you make memories. He said, coming here to Gas with what we're doing, we're making archers. And he was 100% correct. So we added that. So now we're in our 4th year. We have gone from the first year with a grant value of roughly $8,000 to we are now have a value of about $30,000. And we have our first female recipient this year, which I cannot put into words how thrilled and proud and ecstatic I am of our program and of Brittany West. She's out of Washington State as our recipient for this year. I've already had dinner with her and her husband. Just the plan that God had for us. I was already planning on being home in Washington State with my family for a turkey hunt, which I know you're a huge turkey hunter, and we haven't even talked about turkey hunting yet.
Shoulder surgery put me out of turkey season this year, so
that's what I hear.
Yeah.
My vice president flew up to my mother and father's local area. We had dinner with Brittany and her husband. They're just incredible people. We're having our first fundraiser this year in California. Brittany is traveling down for that with her husband. She's going to be our keynote speaker at the fundraiser. And then we're going to be at Gas on June 16th this year. 15th, we arrived Sunday the 15th. We arrived there. We'll be there from the 15th through the 18th. We just received information last night, contact that property owner in Clay City, Kentucky is donating their Airbnb for our lodging at Gas this year. So we get to spend time and fellowship with Brittany at Gas. And then in October, we will be back in Texas for her all-inclusive trophy whitetail hunt. And this is all-inclusive for them. Yeah. None of our activities is at cost to our recipient. So let me really focus on that hunt. It's at a faith-based Airbnb on Chris Dunlap, he's my hunting coordinator, one of my board members, on their horse ranch. We hunt a local 2,300 acre low fence ranch that's 20 minutes from their horse ranch. We pay for their travel, their vehicle travel from their residence to the airport. We pay for their parking. We pay for their luggage. We pay for their flights. We pick them up from the Austin airport. We pay for their lodging. We pay for their food. We have endless companies that are backing us and sending them an incredible archery outdoor package. Hoyt jumped on board last year. This is our second year providing a fully outfitted flagship level bow. Last year we had an Alpha X. This year, Brittany, with her draw link, she has the Alpha AX2 SD. HHA Sports provides this year. It's a nitrix bow sight. We have a bow shop up in New York. Phil Keppel, again, one of the arrows in my quiver, owns 4 Arrows Outdoors. He's donating a Hamskea V2. Gas provides they're putting System X strings on it this year. Evan at Hoyt, he's donated the quiver, the 2.0 stand, the stabilizer set. I don't want to.
There's so many, because we're going to leave somebody out if we keep doing that.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. So all of this is included. So they get to Texas. They are the first hunter on the ranch for deer season every year for 4 days, one-on-one guiding. We have Grizzly donates a custom A3G cooler that's already on site at the ranch. It's the treasure chest. It's loaded with stuff for when Brittany gets there. After the harvest, we have the meat processing donated. They freeze the meat, they flash freeze it, put it in the cooler, and they ship it to her at no cost to her. Right. And they are also a taxidermist, so they do a full shoulder mount, and they ship the shoulder mount at no cost. This is a lifetime, all-inclusive whitetail hunt. Yes, that's what we do.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So tell us, Aaron, how people can find your company if they want to participate or donate or whatever. Tell them how they can find it and how they can contribute, because we need to we're extending our time here.
A3Ginitiative.org.
The letter A, the number 3, the letter G as in God, initiative.org.
Yes, that takes you to our website. That is a domain of the Limb-itless Outdoors website, which is Limb-itless Outdoors. Both platforms are on Facebook. Both platforms are on Instagram. Both platforms are on LinkedIn. And then Limb-itless Outdoors is on YouTube. My podcast is the Limb-itless Podcast, and the audio recordings are on all major platforms. And then I do a video version as well on YouTube. Okay. And I don't live for me anymore. I live for God, and I try to make the A3G the best that it can be. That's those two things outside of my family are my purpose.
Well, I gotta say, Aaron, it's been awesome just listening to you and your journey. And I mean, you've done so many different things, and as you said, you were known for so many different things. But being known as a man of God and someone who loves Jesus is the priority, is the thing that is the epitome of who we are as men nowadays. So I tip my hat to you for that. I mean, you've had a long road, a long struggle, but you've made it, and you've heard me say on this show many times, there's no wrong way to come to Jesus. There's only your way. And so, and your journey is yours. And I hope that this inspires other listeners out there that God doesn't give up on us. So, don't think it's too late. Don't think that you've done something he can't forgive, because he does every day.
Every day.
There's nothing that you've done that God cannot forgive you for. And he is waiting for you with open arms to come to him and to say, here I am. Here I am, Lord. Here I am.
Yeah. He forgave Paul. Yeah. He forgave Paul.
Yeah. 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 And as Paul said, I'm the worst sinner of all, right? God forgives sinners. He did not come for the righteous. He came for sinners. And that's us. And Aaron Ritter, thank you for joining me here on Christian Outdoors. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, sir.